there's two thought processes. Are you trying to develop a product or service to make money, or are you wanting to create a product or service that solves a problem, which by solving a problem will make money?
Good morning, guys. It's Matt Haycox here, and we are recording another lockdown podcast special from my house. I've got Rick on the line from NuroKor Bioelectronics. We are about to talk bioelectronics, business in general, moving from one country to another and starting from scratch. As per yesterday's podcast, we are streaming this live onto YouTube, onto Facebook, and we're going to try and include some audience interaction, audience commentary at the same time. So forgive me if I'm looking at the screen and making notes more than I normally would. But Rick, thanks a lot for joining us, buddy.
Thanks, Matt. Pleasure.
Can you just give everyone a little bit of a background about yourself and also the business in general? And I guess for the layman, just explain a little bit about what bioelectronics actually is.
Sure. So Rick Rowan, CEO and founder of NuroKor Bioelectronics. Bioelectronics is also sometimes termed by the industry as electroceuticals. It is the technology or science of bioelectrical stimulation. So the use of electrical currents and waveforms within the body to elicit a physiological outcome. As an example, things like defibrillators or pacemakers or hearing aids, they are still a bioelectrical or bioelectronic product. But what we focused on is non-implantable technology for the use in a number of areas such as pain relief, physical recovery, physiotherapy, things like wound healing, feminine health, period pain, a range of medical applications. So we are a bioelectronic medical company.
And tell me, well, two questions. One, do you have to be ill to kind of need your product, or can it be as much for preservation, or not so much preservation, but like betterment? Like I know before we came online, I asked if Fitbit summed up what you did. I think you looked at me with online disgust. No. I mean, would that be an analogy for the layman that I mean, maybe too low a level, but that kind of technology? And then I guess that leads on to the question of, do you need to be ill, or can you be using it in the same way you use a Fitbit to count how many steps you've done each day, to prevent yourself being ill?
So that's a very interesting and valid question. So what tends to happen is that our technology, as let's say using a painkiller, tends to get used reactively. So you've got back pain or you've got knee pain, so you use the product, or you've got a non-healing ulcer or something like that. From a medical perspective, and that's fine. And of course, it can give you temporary relief, or does give you temporary relief. But there is much evidence to show that, for instance, the use of microcurrent, which is another technology that we use, has many physiological benefits and health benefits from an external application point of view. So just general health, cell health, mitochondrial health. Starting to get a little bit technical here, but it definitely can improve your health. Now, another thing, for instance, a big problem with the aging population is something called muscle atrophy. So that's where there's the shrinkage of muscles through aging, which is a natural process. But what tends to happen is it becomes a little bit of a vicious cycle. And with the reduction in muscle mass comes a reduction in overall health and the ability for the body to have a lot of healthy processes. And so artificially reducing that or improving it by using our technology or a version of that technology definitely can have some preventative. Was that the word you're looking for? Preventative.
That was the one.
Definitely can have some preventative applications. Matter of fact, they do have preventative applications, and even from the pain management side. I mean, as 7 years in this space, and I use our own technology or products quite prolifically, but often as soon as the issue goes away, because we don't have a good memory save for pain, I stop using it, when really the best practice would be to continue at least for a few days or regularly to prevent it in the first place. But unfortunately, we are humans, and just by our very nature, we get distracted or we don't think about things when they're not present.
And is this tech? Is your tech? Is it all external to the body? You know, like fastened on somehow, or do you have kit that actually goes inside the skin as well?
No, so that's an interesting point. Bioelectronics itself is an exploding area of medicine. GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, and Google Verily Life Sciences over the last 5 years have invested close to $1 billion in a company called Galvani Bioelectronics. Most of the big money is for invasive technology, so they do want to implant. As you know, you can go now and have implants in your spine or your back or intramuscular for the same type of stimulation, but we focus just on non-invasive. So there's nothing that goes inside; it's all done through the skin.
So, I mean, I went on your website before we came online, and you've got like an ambassadors page or people who use your product type page, which is a kind of a who's who of the sporting world, really, of all kinds of different sports. Are these people with not illnesses, but but let's say people with issues that need correcting, or is it from that preventative aspect, for top level sportsmen to really monitor their performance as well?
Yeah, so it's for both. So it's for, if you think about an elite athlete, so they're pushing their body often to the limit, whether that's training or actually competing. They're also quite often looking after their bodies very well, although most athletes are overtrained and under-recovered. So they use it for both, particularly on the recovery side. Then you've got injury management or pain management. So a lot of athletes are quite attuned nutritionally and with supplements about what they should and shouldn't take and what they do to the body. So as far as bioelectrical tech is concerned, with the body, it's quite a very natural to the body process. So the body doesn't see as anything foreign to it. So there's literally no side effects. But they use it for the recovery aspects, so to better recover, as well as a preventative measure for things like warm-up, muscle fiber activation, all of the things that you would think that an elite athlete would do. The technology can assist with in many areas, and if it works for elite athletes, it goes without saying that it's going to work for the average person. It's just that the degree may be different.
Cool. Okay, listen, I want to talk about, I'd say, a few more generic business,
Absolutely,
concepts and ideas now, just a little bit away from biotech. I mean, before we came online, you and I were briefly talking about your backstory, which involved being in a business back in Australia where you had a fallout, separation, whatever it was, with your partner there, and effectively uprooted, came to England in an Airbnb, and that's how NuroKor was started. I mean, just talk me through that a bit from a mental perspective. Obviously, I'm not digging into why the business fallout happened, but I want to know where your head was at when you separated. If it felt catastrophic, if it was mentally tough to kind of come back, especially bringing your family over to a completely new continent and starting from scratch.
Wow. Yeah. Sorry, just taking a deep breath. Actually, to be completely honest, I don't think I've actually talked about this in any interview up until this point. So I'll give it a go.
Well, I apologize for putting you on the spot.
No, that's entirely fine. That's entirely fine.
You can tell me to cut it if you want, although we are live.
Yeah. So, long story short, without going into the background, we sold up everything. We arrived in the UK. I have 4 children who at the time were under 10, and the oldest one's only 11. It was only a year and a half ago. And we arrived with basically suitcases and very little by way of resources, money, and we arrived in an Airbnb. So it was quite a scary thing. Well, luckily, I do have family, or some family here, who were able to assist for a period of time. But nonetheless, we had to stand on our own. I mean, there was no plan B. So within that Airbnb, although the company was incorporated a few months prior, that's when the company was actually born. So that's when the serious side of things started. I started getting on the phone, calling internationally, finding potentially interested distributors, talking to my business contacts about would they seed fund or invest in this business idea and concept. And I'm pleased to say that we were able to achieve things in that Airbnb on the phone and via video call, just like this, to the degree where we were able to achieve some seed funding. Wasn't a lot, but enough to get us going. I was also able to help fund the business by taking pre-orders or pre-sales through international distribution, although we hadn't actually made a product yet. So I don't know whether that was a good story, my abilities, or just dumb luck, but nonetheless, that's how we got into manufacturing. So fast forward a little bit, we ended up, finding a rental accommodation, and things settled down a little bit, and then began the proper task of building the business and growing and scaling from from those early wins to further making contacts for retail distribution, improving the sales through the 5 countries that we were already in, and again, beginning that scale process. It also became quite apparent that with what we wanted to achieve and the vision that the business and the company had, which was to improve quality of life on a global scale through smart use of our technology, that we needed to think about funding more seriously. An area that was completely foreign to me. I'd never raised capital in the past. They were always, self-funded businesses or owner-funded businesses. So it was a very, very sharp learning curve, and one that we've headed on a continual trajectory. But our vision or methodology has also attracted some top people. So we started to attract people from much bigger medical device companies and technology companies that were related to our area. And they were wanting to come on board, knowing that we were a startup, come on board at major salary sacrifices because they wanted to be part of what we were doing. And we've been very fortunate that has continued in many ways, including from current lineup of investors along the way. And it's, without making a long story very, very short, we've continued to reach levels and goals that we couldn't have dreamed about in the beginning.
Tell me, you mentioned that you had family in the UK prior, but was that the reason you landed in England, or were you coming here for business reasons as well?
So I had been traveling here for 2 years prior, every other month actually, about 6 months, 6 times a year. And Australia is a great place to live geographically. Weather, we lived in a rather idyllic spot in Australia, so we didn't come for the weather. But it was UK at the time, excluding discussions about Brexit, was it is the hub of Europe. And Europe, UK and Europe was a much bigger opportunity by way of market, product acceptance, technology development, government support for R&D. The list goes on. It just made a lot more sense. And no, it wasn't a family. That was just a fortunate part of it.
I'd just like to talk a little bit as well about how you find the differences of doing business in the UK. I guess both economically, climate-wise, politically, if you want to say, compared to back in Australia. It's something I always like to talk about. With people who are from another country or have done material amounts of business in another country. I think something that's I guess a bit of a stereotype, or let's call it Facebook fodder or whatever, is to really moan about British red tape and government standing in the way of small businesses and other impositions that are put upon us. I have done business, or whether that's running of businesses in other countries. I mean, I've had multiple businesses in the US, and I have done business from a transactional perspective in certain other countries. And I believe that the UK is a phenomenal environment, to conduct business in. Yes, there's always, let's say, humps put in our way in all kinds of situations, in all kinds of circumstances. But I really find that the UK is a fantastic climate to raise funds, to make sales, to get people off the ground. I mean, you know, the US is always talked about as the land of opportunity. But I mean, I don't know if you've done biotech business in the US, but I mean, having done normal retail type business in the US, I find the place a bloody nightmare. I mean, the rules, the regulations, the policies, the procedures, the length of time it takes to get a water tap put in a restaurant is absolutely unbelievable, and I really find it a massive business prevention. And I guess what I've experienced from a retail perspective can only be even worse from a medical perspective. But a couple of questions really. You know, how do you find the differences between the UK and Australia? And for anyone out there moaning that the UK is a tough climate to do business in, maybe you as an international Aussie can give the UK a bit of a big up and tell these people to stop moaning.
You've answered everything for me. What you've said there, absolutely spot on, and it mirrors exactly my own. Not just thoughts, but experiences. So I really believe that you don't know how good you do have it in the UK. I mean, it's the reason that we're here. Australia has just as much, if not as much red tape, but, you know, it's quite an isolated market in a lot of respects. You know, UK still has the advantage of you know, it's the size of its international trade and particularly European trade opportunities. But even within the UK itself, you know, the level of government support compared to Australia, compared to the US for startup businesses, for innovation, for R&D, for a whole range of you know, areas of business, including the overall business climate, the you know, the way people think and do business, you know, particularly from an investor level. We could not have achieved what we have had it been, well, I'm not going to say couldn't, but it would have been a much harder task, I believe. In Australia, US, you're absolutely spot on. Even more so in the medical industry, dealing with the FDA and a whole range of other compliances. USA is like 50 countries in one. And you know, doing business from one to the other is it's complicated, as well as their tax system, you know, is complicated. I mean, UK one might seem a little bit complex, but compared to some other countries, it's a breeze, to be honest.
Tell me, one of the things you mentioned earlier was that one of the ways you funded the business originally was with pre-orders. Is that something that you've continued as your business has expanded? I mean, do you still use that as a strategy to fund the business, or?
Well, when you think about it, it's not particularly new. So there are a number of websites like Indiegogo and Kickstarter and so on, which, you know, take this to a crowd level.
That's immediately what came to my mind when you were talking about it, really. So I thought we could dig deep on this, because a lot of my audience is small business owners or wannabe entrepreneurs who are always seeking funding. And you know, one of the things I'm always hammering on to people is about, you know, creative ways to go and look to fund your business, as opposed to just, you know, stopping because you can't get a bank loan or you know, stopping because you're struggling to raise equity. Because I mean, I will always say that raising equity for a business is probably the single most difficult thing you'll ever do in business. You know, even more difficult than running the business itself. And you know, in today's world, there are, you know, these fantastic, you know, crowdsourcing opportunities. You know, whether it's funding, whether it's pre-ordering, whatever. So yeah, that immediately jumped to mind when you mentioned it. But yeah, please carry on.
And similarly, I mean, when you are raising funding, you're also, you know, you're pre-selling. It's pre-sale. That's more or less what it is. It's in the same context. So one thing I think that is paramount is that whether it's an idea, so whether it's you're wanting to raise funds or pre-sell a service, or whether it's a product, is that although sometimes it's very difficult with limited resources, but you know, you can find inexpensive workarounds, but you must create a product or service brochure. You need something tangible outside of just an idea and, you know, and words on a sheet of paper or a document. Because once it becomes a brochure, it becomes tangible, it becomes real, it becomes an actual product. Now, your end product may not be, you know, the initial brochure, but as long as you deliver on whatever promises you're making within that brochures, that is a rather key thing. So we gave, just like Indiegogo and Kickstarter do, we gave a discount for taking a period of risk whilst we manufactured. I mean, we got to the point where we said, look, this is what it's going to look like, this is what it's going to do, and this is the market for it. If you want to become a distributor, we need you to pre-order, and we're going to deliver within 90 days or whatever it might be. And that's, in simple terms, how we sold it. Similarly, when you're raising funds, this is what we're going to do. This is, what we're going to sell, and these are the markets we're going to sell in. If you want to pre-buy now, you'll see, a return on the upside. So it's not similar or not that different. It's just thinking about, in the context of who you're talking to, how you need to put that into perspective for them.
I think taking that on a slight tangent to some of the people who will be listening and watching to this as well. What I think is beneficial about, you were talking about creating something tangible to be able to physically show your distributors, whether it's the product, whether it's a brochure. But I think there's a lot of benefit in that as well for you to make sure your product really works. Obviously, I'm not saying this in a NuroKor specific context, but I'm sure many people out there who've got this great idea that they want to go and crowdfund for, or sell on Kickstarter or Indiegogo or whatever. It's almost embryonic in the creation stage. And I think the more tangible you can make it to show your potential customers, your potential funders, will actually probably help you solve a lot of the problems that are going to come out along the way, and actually ultimately put you under the pressure to make a better product earlier in the game. Yes.
I mean, I don't want to upset any of your listeners, who've got great ideas for a product or a service. But there's two thought processes. Are you trying to develop a product or service to make money, or are you wanting to create a product or service that solves a problem, which by solving a problem will make money? So in good markets, so prior to current events and some of the negatives that were surrounding the uncertainty of Brexit, etc., which seems like a distant memory at the moment. But these were showing that the products or services that were solving a problem, and sometimes you might initially start with something you think that's a good money maker, but when you start to think about it deeper, you start to see how that it may solve a problem. Then I think you're on the right track, because problem solving is always of value.
100%. I've been making some notes while we were talking. I'm just looking at some of my other questions. Oh yeah, but one of the things I wanted to talk about, obviously quite relevant to Corona now. What is your what's your physical setup insofar as you talked about when you came to the UK, you were doing a lot of business on video conferencing, etc. Do you have an office now? Do you have a physical place with all your staff, or have you always run a distributed workforce?
So a lot of the video calls were international based, but up until this point, we were still, for the most part, decentralized. So our staff are all over the UK, a couple of international. And we do have a registered office in London that we do use for meetings, address, and so on. But as an actual operation, no, we were still decentralized. So from the point of view of internal operations, COVID's had little impact operationally, but obviously, the bulk of our business is done, as is many, face-to-face, particularly domestically, as much as possible, because there's still nothing beats a face-to-face meeting when you can look eyeball to eyeball outside of a screen and talk and engage. I think that human interaction side will never pass. But from an operational perspective, no, we were already or still were decentralized with the intention of having a central location, but that may not have encompassed our whole workforce. It may have encompassed 30, 40, 50% of it.
So as someone who's already been running, a decentralized workforce, what kind of top tips have you got for all these guys sat at home now who are either employers or employees thrown in at the deep end, with no tools and no plans or procedure? What can they do today to get themselves in a better semblance of order?
What I'm fearful of here is whatever answer I give, my own team will go, "That's not true." All right, so I will tell you what works for us, and I'll upfront say that I'm also guilty of not sticking to these as best as I should. Is that for us? Well, let me tell you about some of the shortcomings. So we're used to obviously working remotely, using tools such as Slack and Google Hangouts and WhatsApp to some degree, but using remote tools. We use a project planning tool where we share a lot of our progress and projects, etc. But it really is about trying to maintain communication, and as the number of people goes up, lines of communications amplify exponentially, and it becomes somewhat challenging. But it just falls back to communication. So whether that is talking, whether that is via chat, whether it is via video call, etc., that is paramount, and coming up with systems that everybody can work by. I try not to micromanage. I mean, I appreciate the team. I'm engaging them for their skills. All I'm here for is to help them sort of steer where that expertise is needed. But I try not to engage or have input into their actual expertise. That's what they are for. And I think sometimes at a remote level, it actually becomes a little bit harder because you can't. It's not like you can walk into an office or catch up at the water filler or the tea room, etc. So yeah, it's trying to make the office environment somewhat virtual, but in a way that it's not disruptive. I mean, if I spoke to everyone on my team every day, I wouldn't have a day. Be taken up just by talking to each individual team. So we try to have group sessions when we can, and then we have sort of satellite groups around want and needs for those areas. But I would be a bit of a hypocrite or a bit of a faker if I said to you we had it sorted, because it's from my perspective anyway. I mean, some people look at our team externally and go, "Wow, you guys are doing it amazingly," but from the inside it looks somewhat different.
I think that's the same. Whether you're in a physical office or a virtual office, that life and business is always a work in progress anyway. And but I think anyone I've spoken to of late who is experienced in the decentralized distributed workforce model, all comes back to the same word, which is communication. And something else which I was just thinking about when you were talking then. I do a lot of conversations with people around social media, growing your brand online, and a lot of the answers to people's questions can always be answered with a very simple catch-all, which is the way you behave offline should mirror the way you behave online, or vice versa. And that was really kind of ringing in my head when you were talking then as well about the water cooler, and maybe we need a virtual water cooler or another hub for people to network. And I think if everyone just takes one single catch-all away from this and away from the social media conversations and everything else, that online should be a way of, I guess, accelerating, amplifying, improving, the basics of what are already there. The foundation of what we've created online needs just maintaining and digitizing, really, rather than starting a whole new way of thinking.
Yeah, true. I mean, yeah, we use Hangouts group, for instance, just as a sort of a chat operation. Small wins. People post their small wins, activity, things that have happened. It's just about trying to maintain that feeling of connection as a team. I mean, we are reasonably, close to that as far as I'm concerned, and I think that is just part of our culture.
Well, listen, Rick, it's been fantastic having you on.
Thank you, man.
Thanks for taking time out during what I'm sure is a very, very busy Corona time for you. And had some really interesting things to say there, both about biotech and business in general. So I'm sure the listeners and viewers have enjoyed as much as I've enjoyed talking to you. And thanks a lot for your time, mate.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.